Kamen Rider Wiki.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here with my series review of Kamen Rider Ex-aid. So, this will be a little bit longer than normal episodes, like with most of my series retrospectives of any kind. I'm going to try to not ramble on as much and make it a bit shorter, but I can't make any promises because every time I say that it goes at least 2 minutes over what I was thinking in my head when I said that. But anyway, let's get started. I have to kick this off by saying Ex-aid is one of the most roller coasters I've been on for a Rider series in terms of like my feelings on it. If anyone followed the RR podcast back in the day, when we first saw O's and Shuki said, "O's this stupid little bitch," and now O's is beloved, it's like an extended version of that storyline over the process of a year. I just thought that was a funny comparison for me. Like, maybe 3 of you will get that if you followed the RR podcast and stuff. But, so, I don't even know where to begin with that. Like, again, I'm talking about the video not going on too long, and I don't even know where to begin. Okay, I'll keep this part short. I love video games, so I was really excited by the theme. Some of the designs definitely initially kind of put me off. I'll get into designs later. But I was excited about it, and when it first premiered, it was coming off Ghost, where I was very not impressed. You've seen my Ghost review or anything I've talked about Ghost. I was not keen on Ghost. Very disappointed in it because I loved the designs and stuff. And Ex-aid was a really huge breath of fresh air when it first premiered. It was a lot of fun. The setup was nice. The fights were fun. It set up some interesting-ish questions. And for the first, I want to say first quarter, maybe a little less, I was pretty content. I had some concerns, but I was looking forward to watching it every week. And then around the middle chunk, there was this huge anger phase, which you probably know if you follow me on social media or on these reviews or anything. And Ex-aid did a lot to disappoint me, and I was really mad. And I also had some negative influences around me, which I've since gotten rid of, which is nice. That's another story for no other time, but, and I was just kind of down on Toku, and some of my points do stand. I'm not backpedaling on a lot of it in certain ways, but, it was very negative in the middle, and I quit doing the reviews for a few weeks, if you recall, I think it was right after Dan died, because I got tired of kind of negatively talking about it, and Ex-aid, regardless of what I was saying, it was a really hard one to have a conversation about, and I'm not saying all the fans are like this, but it reminded me of Dino Charge, is that it was really hard to have a balanced conversation, because like even when I would have an episode review where I would say I still really don't like this, but this was cool, it was like a cult mentality. I've encountered this only so far with Dino Charge and in Ex-aid, where it was like, if you don't like it, die in hell, and there was like no in between, like no like, well, I really like Ex-aid, but I can kind of see that, or I really don't agree with you, but it was like die in hell. So I got kind of exhausted with dealing with the cult, so I quit doing reviews. And I was going to quit watching it and considered binging the last 20 later after everyone had stopped, you know, hyping Ex-aid up so much. But then Kamen Rider Chronicle was coming. And I'm like, you know what? Let's try that. I just want to see how it is. I was honestly curious. And that brought the show back for me. That really renewed my interest, and more or less, with some minor dips throughout, from Kamen Rider Chronicle onward, I started to really enjoy the show and see a lot of its value. It fixed a lot of my problems, and that's the point I'm trying to get to. It's really funny because it was like, oh, breath of fresh air, hatred. Oh, I'm actually going to miss you. I kind of like you now. But my point of this whole spiel is I really want to rewatch Ex-aid. My plan is next summer, that's tentatively, but it'll be next year sometime, whenever I'm in a Toku mood like I am now, and I'm really excited about watching Toku. I want to rewatch it because I have a theory about Ex-aid being a show better binged. Because I've watched live since Kiva, but everything before that I had in some sort of binge format, and some shows do lend themselves better to that, and I think Ex-aid would be a better show binged for the middle arc, because so many of the problems I had were answered, and it leaves you less annoyed and upset when a question or a problem you have here is answered within the matter of the same day or a few days if you're binging, than sitting on it for weeks and weeks and months. Because they're solved quickly and you see, oh, that's why they did this, this was part of the story, instead of why'd they do this, and then 3 months later you're still pissed until they resolve it. So I might do some sort of small update video when I do that, just to out of curiosity, but I just wanted to point that out, as I think that would answer not all of my concerns, because I did still have concerns, which I'll be bringing up in a second here, but I think that would soothe some of the turbulence I had in the middle. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because that was something I thought about a lot, because like I said, some of the problems I had were answered. But let's get started. We're already 5 minutes in, and I want to try to make this shorter. So, as I always start with the plot. The plot with Ex-aid was a bit all over the place at times, but at the end of the day, I thought it was pretty good. The setup for it was interesting in combining the Bugster virus with like doctors and gaming. It was a very Toku thing to bring two things together that you wouldn't necessarily put in your head. I appreciated early on especially that we didn't always do the 2-episode format, and I think they had a couple 2-episode ones, but basically they would resolve it however quickly they needed. Like if it was 1 episode, 2 episodes, whatever. I appreciated that because, especially recently, you can get sick of that 2-episode formula Rider has. So I appreciated that. My main concerns early on were, it seemed like a lot of the mysteries were weird, like M all of a sudden having 2 days in which he had suspicious surgeries, which ended up getting answered later when it was like, this is when blood was put in you, this is when he was taken out. But at the time, it seemed like a weird way to come up with a twist that wasn't really a twist. And then my initial, I remember, reservations came from talking about Zero Day, and I was just kind of exhausted at having that same plot in almost every post-decade series of the Begins Night, Global Freeze Day. I'm like, here we go again. And it was treading over a lot of the same ground, so I was a bit annoyed at that. And I felt some of the stuff right before Kamen Rider Chronicle with Dan was a bit muddled, and the episodes got a bit repetitive in terms of it would just be something happening, and then Genom would show up, and Paradox would show up and get in their way, and I wasn't really sure where they were going, and the motivations behind Kamen Rider Chronicle were very confusing. Like I said, I'm curious to see how it comes off, not only now knowing, but when it's binged, because it made no sense to me because they didn't really explain themselves at the very beginning when they would say, like, Genom would say, okay, Kamen Rider Chronicles ready, time to get rid of the Kamen Riders. And now it makes sense because it was like, okay, they're going to use ride players, which I guess I should have thought of at the time. But in my head I was like, it didn't make sense. Like, why you need the riders for the game, don't you? Like, it just, the way it all was very confusing. I was pretty annoyed at Dan's antics. I wasn't sure where they were going. But around Kamen Rider Chronicle, I started to really enjoy it. The concept kind of reminded me, I said a couple times, about like a Black Mirror episode of this game that actually took lives. It created this interesting new dynamic of having the players out there, them kind of getting in the way, Kronos being introduced. Excuse me. I thought he was a great villain, which I'll get into when I do characters. But I thought, once that arc went from Rider Chronicle to basically Kronos' plan, when that became clear, I thought it was actually really brilliant of the way of mixing the themes, of him saying, you know, we're going to use Chronicle to turn people into data, so now we take control of their lives, and basically turn it into like a marketing scheme in a way for money, and then that kind of nixes the need for doctors because there would be no, you know, diseases. It would just be data that can be restored. And I thought that was a really cool way of mixing the two themes that I wish would have had some hints of becoming more clear early on. But that was really cool. And I really enjoyed all that. I really liked the storyline they did with M and Palad, which again I'll get into a little more detail when I do characters here in a second. But I thought it was an interesting twist on the Rider becomes a monster in him, or has a monster in him storyline. So there was a lot of storylines in this, basically the second half of the series, that I thought flowed together really well. And it kind of reminded me of Drive's second half, where they kept laying out plots, and I was thinking, okay, this is going to be the final plot, or, oh, okay, this is going to be here for a while. And then they would wrap those plots up, and I honestly did not know where they were going to go next. And in a good way. It wasn't really random, not necessarily, but I liked that I couldn't pinpoint where they were going next. And the very end stuff was a little bit weird and kind of rushed. I think they could have trimmed some fat earlier in the series if they knew they were going to get cut short 2-3 episodes. But it was kind of a little rushed, a little more basic, like here's the final boss fusing with Kronos. And there wasn't, I wish that the final episode arc was a little more intriguing and involving as some of the stuff that came before it. It didn't exactly anger me, but just because Ex-aid actually had gotten me to that point, which I hadn't been in some time for Toku period, of, man, I can't wait for the next episode. I was a little bit disappointed some of the final episodes, while entertaining, were a bit generic. But yeah, overall, it was a rocky ride, but I would say at the end of the day, I did enjoy Ex-aid's plot, and there were some cool things about it. And like I said, I'd be interested to see how some of the stuff is soothed by binging it, because your problems are resolved a lot quicker. And I do think that with certain things that they set up that were fixed later, they could have set it up in a better way that didn't annoy me as much, because I've watched things both binge and live where they've done similar things, but somehow it's hard to describe, but in their delivery it was more clear that there was going to be an ongoing payoff to that, whereas this, it seemed like this is the reveal right now, and that's why I got so upset. And there's something to do with the way they wrote it, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but some people might know what I'm talking about. Before I quickly get into characters here, I did want to just draw attention to something I did appreciate about the series, especially more so early on, was the use of interesting fights and using video game concepts and logic, and that was really fun and entertaining and innovative to watch. It definitely lessened over time, but there still was like moments of video game logic, like when Dan found a way to restore their saves, or Kronos' powers of resetting, or like the idea of the final boss, you know, having stages. And I really loved that about the series all throughout, even when I was mad, is that the video game fights were entertaining, using stuff that video gamers know, and the use of logic I thought was very well done, and I wanted to point that out before I forget it. Okay, characters I think overall was still one of the weaker bits for me. In this last half I did find more appreciation for some that I liked and didn't like before. Again, it'll be something that'll be interesting to revisit next year. I'll try to keep this a little more condensed, but Dan, and Poppy were the characters I disliked the most throughout the series. I'm not going to go over them in a row, but you probably know that if you follow me. And M's still one of my least favorite protagonists. These last couple years we've had these sort of really annoying goody-goody protagonists, and I've just been waiting for a badass protagonist, and so it was kind of annoying. And he was so overly goody-goody, and I've gone about this at length, so I'm not going to go on too long. But I just want one where you can still be kind of more of a moral character and not so much like in a gray area, but not convey it in such a naive and one-track way. And I finally found a good example on that when I most recently watched the Kamen Rider Ichigo movie. Ichigo is a good character who is, Hongo, who is badass, but also righteous at the same time. So he'll say dorky inspirational quotes and like follow the right path, but he's also a badass. And I think that's a good example of a character that they should go for if they're going to do more of a goody-goody instead of a badass. But I was just kind of tired of that. I found M to be really whiny, and he was like, and when I saw him get beat up, it was cathartic, and he just really annoyed me. And like I said, I hate that when it seems disingenuous. It seems like he's just reading off of like Hallmark cards about protecting smiles, and that he would never really look at other people's point of views. I think amongst the three I disliked the most, he had the least moments in the last half that endeared me to him at all, but he was more tolerable in the last arc. I really like what he did with Palad and my way of showing him basically to appreciate life. And he did have some pretty good moments in the end that weren't quite as annoying, so I wasn't hating on him quite as much, and I don't think I have quite the same level of hatred I did for him during my hate period, but I'm still not a huge fan of him. But yeah, I don't want to go on about that too more. I'm going to talk about Hiro and Taiga together a little bit, because something that always bothered me was it was weird to basically have there's like an archetype in a lot of animes and tokus shows in general, like the badass asshole character, and it was weird to have two of them in the same show that were regulars and basically just slight variations of each other. You had the one that was actually doing good. I mean, they both were, but Taiga was more on the edge, and so it was basically so similar. But I liked Taiga the most of the two at the beginning, and he was a little rocky, and there was times where it was weird that I felt like it was another reason I disliked M, is he was getting in his way, is even though Taiga's approach wasn't very nice and his end result was going to be something good. But I did like Taiga, and I thought he had a good arc, especially when you think about the stuff from his prequels when he was the first, you know, writer, and I felt that could have been even expanded on more, is because there was good stuff with him basically having been the first writer too, and he kind of failed. But I enjoyed his bond with Nico through the series. I thought the episode with the Dorifamu beat Bugster was good stuff for him. It was a little bit overshadowed by the honking of horns of the annoying humor, but I thought the stuff about him basically wanting to continue this fight and feeling like no one really cared about what happened to him, so he had to be the one to be sacrificial, and his bond with Nico because she saw him as a doctor, and then obviously the end result of him finally getting his license back. It was a lot of neat stuff that I still think they definitely could have expanded on before, but I thought ultimately was pretty solid. And Hiro, I didn't like quite as much throughout, because he just seemed pretty generic to me and also very stubborn. He did get that one nice arc when M kind of went to the Palad personality of he saw things from M's point of view, and from the very beginning of the series I wanted them basically both to see each other's approaches, because when it came to saving the patient, M was too careful and would get so involved, whereas Brave would be like, hey, if we cure them right now, we don't have to worry about getting so invested, we cut it off the trunk. And I think that there was value in both their approaches, and in some case one or the other I think would be more beneficial, or a hybrid. And I'm a little disappointed that we never got something like that, but I was never a huge fan of his because I didn't really care about his arc involving appreciating M's approach more, but I really loved his final big arc with him working for Kronos to get his fiance back, and then ultimately letting her go because what she wanted was for him to be a good doctor, and he had to let go of her. And I thought it was really well done and really made me like him more. And he was never a character I really hated, it was just kind of one I was indifferent to. And again, that made me realize that I think both him and Taiga could have had even more throughout the whole series. But I did end up really liking his final arc. Laser, Kiriha was my favorite. He's my favorite character in the series, and he probably got the least amount of screen time out of the core 5. But I liked him early on, and before I talk about his character stuff I liked, he's just kind of one of those characters, Hibiki being an example, is a character I just kind of automatically like because I just like his personality, like just the way they carry themselves lends themselves to just me liking them, if that makes any sense. Sometimes, like, there's stuff I like about Hibiki's character, but the way, like, Hibiki and Kiriha, they're very different characters, but I'm comparing it because they both have personalities I liked. Is that the way they carried themselves, I automatically sort of liked them, and that's the way I was with Kiriha. He was just a very cool guy. I loved the way he carried himself. But I liked his storyline. I think I definitely had a problem, I remember talking about this early on with, I don't know why he lied about having a second friend that died of the Bugster virus, like, to get M to work with him, like somehow one friend dying wouldn't be enough. Like, sorry man, your story isn't tragic enough. And then there was some really stupid stuff with them lying to each other and not believing each other in a way that could have very easily been solved, but I think it could have been done better, and I get why they did it in the long run for the story, but set that aside because I've talked about that at length before. And I liked once people didn't believe him. Well, first of all, I liked that he was smart enough to figure a lot of the stuff out early. But, where was I going with that, right? But, like, after he, you know, had been deemed a liar, he's just like, you know what, you're not going to believe me anyway, I'm going to do my own thing. And then, obviously, he died and wound up coming back. And there was some things that I was a little bit annoyed by his return, but then also at the same time, they didn't annoy me as quite as much. Like, he came back sort of as evil Kiriha and was working with Kronos, and that made sense because I thought there was some interesting stuff with the fact that his friends, who never treated him that well in the beginning of the series anyway, were now working with the guy that killed him, but it ended up being a ruse, and it kind of created this moment of like, I wasn't sure I felt about that, but at the end of the day I was actually pretty fine with it. It was kind of a neat moment to see him being like, the big reveal of what he said to M when he punched him was, I'm just playing, and that he was the reason that he got Muteki back. So I was ultimately fine with it. I thought it was neat that he finally, you know, he got the white coat, and I like how just chill he was about Genom. He's like, you know what, I'm over this, you know, we need to just solve this, and he used their fight to solve or at least an aspect of the Gemdis virus. And he was just a really likable character, and I wish he had gotten more, and I'm looking forward to seeing him eventually V-Cinemas and stuff, because he was really a bright spot for me, even in the moments I wasn't a fan. Oh, now, speaking of things that I'm a fan, Dan, Kuroto. I want to try not to go on too long about this, because this video is already longer than I want it to be, and I apologize, but it is a series wrap. Dan was such a frustrating character for me, because that over-the-top Toku humor can really get on my nerves. But I think at the core of it, which I've mentioned multiple times, at the core of it, what frustrated me about Dan was that I think he had such potential to be an even greater character that it frustrated me that they wound up turning him into such an overblown cartoon. Because early on, I quite liked him. Like, even after he killed Kiryu, who was my favorite, Dan was like my second favorite character at the time because I thought he was so smart. Like it was so weird watching the beginning of the series or movies that took place during that time when he was so quiet and reserved, and he was so smart and he fooled everyone. But then that started to fall apart when his plan seemed unclear and he started to become a cartoon. And I think there was a balance to be had there between a cunning, like intelligent person, because he was smart, because he always touted his abilities as a game god, and he solved a lot of problems during the end of the series. But what I mean is like someone who was a skillful manipulator, but had that twinge of crazy, because I think that's what they were going for, and I think they overblown it sometimes. And I'd hoped with his return they would balance him more, but they made him even more into a cartoon. I hated him a little bit less as time went on because I was kind of more into Toku. Again, negative influences were away from me. But I still wish there was more of a balance because especially after his dad was introduced, I think there was great potential for his character to be amazing. And I know a lot of people liked the crazy side, but I think more of a balance would have endeared him more to me. But like with M and Poppy, there were moments in the last half where I did enjoy him on some aspect and I didn't hate him as much. The scene where he literally overacted himself to death I thought was pretty funny. Him going, Emmy! I admit I laughed. I thought it was funny when he's like, we gotta destroy the Gashat, the Chronicle one, and then they did it, and he's like, my life's work. So he did make me laugh. There was moments when I worried about him when his lives were going down quickly, but it still wasn't the best for me, but I could later on see some of the reasons why people liked the overacting. I guess just my point is that I think there was more potential there to be more of a balance. Like I said, especially with his dad. And I don't want to go on about that too long because I've done that a lot. Try to go through this a little quickly now. Poppy was always a character I wasn't a huge fan of for a lot of reasons, which is interesting because I hate that overblown Toku cartoon character, but she also had Asuna, which is a normal side, and I wish that was used more. So she just kind of overall annoyed me, but starting around her arc where she sort of became evil, sort of, for the moment when she was lording over Kamen Rider Chronicle, and it's funny because I talked about how when M would get beat up, it would be cathartic, and I thought it would be with Poppy too, when they were about to destroy her. At first I was like, do it. And then she's like, I just wanted to play Doifabu beat with everyone. I'm like, don't do it, she's just a girl. And I felt sorry for her. The actress did a really good job with that. And there was still definitely moments that annoyed me, but she was actually pretty tolerable from that moment on for me, because I kind of was endeared to her a little bit, and she had some smart moments, like being the one to bring back Dan, which at the end of the day was a smart decision for the overall fight. And she had a good sacrifice, so I'm still not an overly huge fan of that type of character, but given that it's a video game character, it makes sense. And I think of the three that I hated the most, I think she redeemed herself, a lot of air quotes in this episode, the most by the end. Palad was a character I always really liked. I liked his performance. I thought he added an interesting factor to it, sort of chaos. There was a weird moment where his logic didn't make sense, where he was like really mad at Dan for carelessly killing bugsters, but then he would do the same thing. It was a really small arc in the middle that really annoyed me, confusing wise, but I always liked Palad. And like I said, I thought his arc with M was really cool because there was a lot of theories about M's bugster virus. It's a common storyline to have the main writer having been a monster or becomes a monster. And a lot of people, there was a theory that, you know, Genius Gamer was a bugster. Well, that was pretty obvious. But there was another theory which I really liked, that the goody-goody M we always talked to was actually the bugster, and it was the cocky one that was actually the real one. I thought that could have been really interesting, too. But I thought it was interesting to basically make it this whole other bugster that was more tied to him than most bugsters are to their hosts, and creating this almost like he's a different version of him, and he just wanted to play together with him. And I just thought it was an interesting twist on the writer becomes a monster, to have it be a whole other character counterpoint, and they had a really good arc there where he showed Palad the value of life and them sort of working together. And they're like with Taiga and Hero, knowing where they went, I think there's more that could have been done, but it still was one of my favorite storylines, to be honest. I'm trying to think of any other quick hits. Graphite was okay. I think he served his purpose. I don't have too much else to say about him. I know people really liked him. Oh, I think this is the only last one I want to touch on, so I don't go on too long, because I don't think I'm running over my head right now. I'm forgetting anyone else that I really want to talk about. No. Kronos. Kronos is one of my favorite Rider villains of all time. Because I thought Dan could have been such a badass villain. I was so excited about Kronos because he carried himself the way I thought Dan was going to, as this complete badass this force of nature. It was really this huge threat, and just like I said, the way he carried himself with that, the way the system worked, his plan, definitely crazy, but and he definitely hit the crazy button where you see crazy runs in the Dan family in the end, which it bothered me a little, but not so much, because they usually get mustache twirly near the end. I wish it was a little bit less mustache twirly and crazy near the end, but his plan on the whole, like I talked about with basically uniting the themes of video game and Doctor, in terms of, like, you wouldn't need doctors anymore because we're going to control all your lives. I thought it was a really, while crazy, really genius plot and plan for the series, and I thought he was the great, like, ultimate villain of the series, and like I said, became one of my favorite Rider villains of all time, personally. And also, side note, I really thought it was cool that he was using the suit that was meant to be the player's ultimate reward for beating the game. Like, because it's, if you were playing this as a video game, you know, or as watching it as a series, this would be the ultimate heroic final armor, and he was using it as the villain. I thought that was really cool. Okay, segue now just into real quick thoughts. I really did like the designs of Ex-aid. Like I said, like for a lot of people, it was initially very off-putting because it was very strange, and I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, that's not a Kamen Rider because such and such reason, but once you understand fully, because I understood what they were going for, them looking like video game avatars and stuff, but once you fully get into that, they're really cool and clever. I did like the level 1 forms. I thought they were really adorable. I still kind of wish what I initially thought was true about that being the form they took going into people's bodies was used instead, just because it did look funny when they were out, but I did find them adorable. I liked a lot of the designs. Ex-aids I liked a lot. I liked Genm's a lot, even more so than Ex-aids. I thought the black color scheme was really cool for it. I thought Snipes was really unique with the thing over it. I love both of Palad's individual sides. And initially, I want to bring this up real quick, is that the two suits that I initially wasn't so hot on that I ended up kind of loving because of story reasons was Palad's Perfect Knockout. I ended up really liking because I'm like, well, that's kind of a weird fusion. It looks more like an Ex-aid form. But once you find out he's so tied to Ex-aid, I thought it was really cool. And Mighty Brothers, too. Once you find out that that's him and Palad, and just the way it was used, and I was never a huge fan design-wise. The concept of the Mario Brothers and the Gashat was always cool, but both of those forms I ended up actually loving because of the storyline, and it really endeared me to them. Dangerous Zombie's got to be one of my favorite all-time suits. I thought it was fantastic. I quite liked Muteki. Still not huge on Maximum Mighty, but I don't want to get too much into it other than I really did love the suits a lot. I thought they conveyed the video game theme very well. The last thing, briefly to touch on, I thought I had some good little scory bits that conveyed the sort of video gamey, technological theme. And as someone who's not usually a huge Toku music fan, and even though I made some jokes about how I always skipped the theme, because even when I like the theme, I'll skip it because I'm impatient, I did really love Ex-aid's theme. It was, ever since I got back into it, I never skipped it once they brought it back. It was a very awesome theme that really conveyed the sort of nostalgic video game nature of the show. But anyway, this video is about 20 plus minutes. I was aiming for 15 and I was just getting to the end of plot at 15, so I'm sorry. Thank you to all those who have listened. But as a final wrap up, Ex-aid was definitely a bumpy ride. It had flaws that I brought up that were corrected, but some that I still believe stand. I'll do a short revisit video to see how much those are fixed. But bumpy ride aside, I think at the end of the day, I'm really upset at myself for being so overly mad in the middle, because at the end of the day, I think it is a fun ride. Definitely some things that could have been better, a little more innovative, but it was overall an enjoyable time, and I think they wielded the video game theme well in most cases, and I would give the series overall an 8.5. And again, I'm sorry I didn't enjoy it so much in the middle, but I'm looking forward to revisiting next year and hopefully enjoying the whole ride. But yeah, that's about it for this. Again, thank you for bearing with me as I tried to make a short video and failed yet again. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Awesome Rider, signing out.